One question that I see get asked a lot in COD Zombies is what happened to Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man after Black Ops 4 Zombies? What was their fate after they were banished to the Dark Aether? Are they still alive in our current Zombies storyline? Do they still exist? Did them being banished to the Dark Aether kill them? And if not, what became of Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man? Now, if this was a simple question, I wouldn't be making a video on it, and the answer might very well be clear and explainable in 10 seconds. I could say they died after they were sent back to the Dark Aether, but it was never officially told to us. It was up to us to come up with our own conclusion, and I suppose that's what most people concluded. But there is a chance they weren't killed straight away. I don't think they're alive right now in our current zombie story in Cold War, Vanguard or Modern Warfare 3, but between the time of Black Ops 4 and Cold War Zombies, there were many years that went by. Tag the Totem happened in 1965. Cold War Zombies starts with the first map D Machine in 1983, but that isn't where the story begins. That would be back during the 40s with Project Endstation, or closer to the end of World War II when Zikov shuts down the cyclotron and becomes trapped within the Dark Aether. And before then we also have the storyline involving Vanguard Zombies. So the point is, in between the time of Dr. Monty being banished to the Dark Aether and where we are right now, once you consider time in the Dark Aether works different to our world. I always forget the exact conversion, but I think it's something like 1 year to us is 10 years within the Dark Aether. Time in there is a lot slower. So that means by the time the story picks off in Cold War with our first map, D Machine, in 1983, in our years, Dr. Monty would have been inside of the Dark Aether for 18 years. But in Dark Aether years, well, you can work it out. So the question is, if he miraculously managed to survive being banished to the Dark Aether, which there's nothing to say he didn't, just like everyone else who was banished there, such as the Victor's characters, Misty, Malton, Stuhlinger and Samuel, although we can say they are 100% not alive. Way too much time has passed. If they weren't killed by some Dark Aether creature such as a Mimic, an Abomination or even a zombie, then they 100% would have died of old age. However, Dr. Monty is different because he's not human. Yes, he can take the form of a human, which is how we usually see him. He uses the form of an old British man to manipulate people, but his true form is this. And because we know Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man were the first two beings to exist alongside the Keepers, as far as we're aware, Dr. Monty can't die of old age. So unlike the Victor's characters, that rules out that option, meaning if he did survive being banished to the Dark Aether, that leaves us with a few other options. Firstly, I suppose the best thing for us to even do is figure out what Dr. Monty even is, because similarly, what a tongue twister that is, the Shadow Man follows a similar path, or at least he did. The big difference between the two is the Shadow Man, along with some of the Keepers, became corrupted by the Dark Aether. We know then a war broke out between the corrupted Keepers and the uncorrupted ones, between the Shadow Man and Dr. Monty. They fought, and upon facing defeat, the corrupted Keepers, along with the Shadow Man, were then banished to the Dark Aether, where they remained for eons. Over the time that they were trapped there, the corrupted Keepers then began to evolve because the Dark Aether changes you. No matter who or what you are, the Dark Aether will change you not only mentally, but physically. So the corrupted Keepers began to contort and change shape, grow in size, and eventually turned into what we know as the Apothicons, and they then remained in the Dark Aether until later on they managed to escape again. But the point is, this was the main difference between Monty and the Shadow Man. They look very similar, they share similar powers, they can shapeshift. Another one of Dr. Monty's powers, as we saw in the ending of Revelations, is he has the power to just click his fingers and wipe you from existence. They are both extremely powerful, but they may not be the most powerful creatures, let's just call them that, to ever exist. Especially the Shadow Man, because in the Dark Aether we have something called Elder Gods. Now, in order to become an Elder God, you have to reside within the Dark Aether, and to achieve that status in there, although it's never been explained to us from what I can gather, it's not based on size or how big you are, because we know this right here is an Elder God, and you'll see why this is important in just a second. But to achieve this status, it looks like it's based on hierarchy. If this creature right here has Elder God status and the Shadow Man doesn't, that would suggest that this is more powerful than the Shadow Man, or it could be based off the amount of time you spend there. Some creatures have been in the Dark Aether for longer than others. The point is, in the Dark Aether, the ranking of an Elder God is higher than that of the Shadow Man, who, which you might think is contradictory, is the war leader of the Apothicons, yet doesn't hold the highest rank. And compared to the plenty of other creatures that we've seen over the years, such as the old ones, we definitely know that Monty and the Shadow Man probably aren't that powerful when you put everything into perspective, but having the abilities that they did, being able to shapeshift, Monty somewhat having control over an endless cycle, they're still powerful. And so with that established, going back to the end of Black Ops 4 when they were banished to the Dark Aether, there is a chance with the collapse of the multiverse and the end of the cycle that somehow killed Dr. Monty, perhaps because of his connection to the Aether. There was a reason why he wanted to keep it going, to keep himself alive, but Nikolai does tell us in the Tag der Toten ending that everything, including Dr. Monty, was banished to the Dark Aether, which would suggest that he was sent there and managed to live, at least for a short amount of time. As for the Shadow Man, well, whilst all of this was going on, he was still trapped inside of the summoning key, and well, the summoning key was destroyed, so we don't quite know what his fate was. When the key was destroyed, perhaps he was as well, or his soul was also banished to the Dark Aether. But there's a good chance that he didn't make it, however, Dr. Monty did. And so, now that we've established that it was likely he was trapped in the Dark Aether in 1965, where is he now in our current zombie story? That's if he's not dead. And if he is dead, well, how did he die? Well, as we've just established, within the Dark Aether, there is a ranking system with Elder Gods being the highest of them all, the most powerful. And in Vanguard Zombies, which is a prequel to Cold War, before Dr. Monty arrived here, we learn of many other Elder Gods that existed. Decimator, Zabella, Vakana, Invicta, Be'lakor, Syraxis, Nauticus, and Cortifex. All some of the most powerful creatures in the Dark Aether, Cortifex being the main one. And in Vanguard Zombies, in the final map, the Archon, we defeat Cortifex, who is the main villain, where his dead body then plunges to the depths of the Dark Aether. And all of the other Elder Gods, Nauticus, Syraxis, etc., are just left to carry on existing in the Dark Aether. That was in the 40s, but things changed a few years later, where, as we see in D Machine's intro cutscene, after the end of World War II, Zikov was sealed in the bunker at Project N Station and basically sacrificed his freedom in order to shut down the cyclotron, becoming trapped within the Dark Aether. But Zikov didn't die when he became trapped there, like a lot of other people. He was just then left to fend off for himself in the Dark Aether against all of the creatures that existed in there, mainly the zombies. He rarely came across other creatures, but where Zikov succeeded is he strangely managed to survive in there for a long time. Pretty much everyone else is killed a few weeks or days, months after, normally by zombies, but Zikov managed to survive in the Dark Aether for days, which then turned into months, which then turned into years. And what happens the longer you are trapped in the Dark Aether? You change, mentally and physically. Meaning, because Zikov had been in there for a very, very, very long time, he changed a lot, and his influence in the Dark Aether changed as well. Enemies in there, such as zombies, used to see Zikov as prey, they would hunt him down, but because he had managed to survive in the Dark Aether for such a long time, he outgrew them. The zombies then became his prey. He began to hunt them, and then soon after, bigger, more powerful creatures such as mimics, disciples, abominations would also become prey to Zikov. He would outgrow them in power, and soon enough, after years and years of this, Zikov was becoming one of the most powerful creatures within the Dark Aether, where eventually he got up to the point where he could begin to take on Elder Gods, meaning any Elder God that existed within the Dark Aether at the same time as him then became Zikov's prey as well. And well, we know after taking on all of the Elder Gods and becoming the victor, now the most powerful thing within the Dark Aether, Zikov became an Elder God himself, and he became known as the Forsaken. He had grown to such a huge size and had emitted that much power, enemies that once saw him as prey now saw him as their god. They took orders from him. And where this all ties back to Dr. Monty is, well, one thing that we learned is along Zikov's journey of him becoming the Forsaken, one of the things he would do is eat other Elder Gods. That is how he gained his nickname, the Stealer of Souls, the Devourer of Worlds. But upon doing so, after eating an Elder God, he would then take its power. All of the Elder Gods that I mentioned earlier, the Apothicon Elder God, Cortifex, Nauticus, Syraxis, etc., were all unique in their own different ways. They had their own abilities and powers. I'm assuming there were many other Elder Gods that the Forsaken came against that we don't know of, that would have had powers that we don't know existed. But because one of the Forsaken's abilities is to shapeshift, he can take the form of a human, that means he must have consumed an Elder God that had this power, and the Forsaken actually used this power to manipulate us. We know he was speaking to us from within the Dark Aether, pretending to be a normal human that had just randomly managed to survive in there for a very long time. He was pretending to be his past self, Zikov, but unknowingly to us, he was his Forsaken form. He was trying to trick us into helping him escape from the Dark Aether. But if we listen to the manipulative radios that Zikov or the Forsaken sent to us, well, on day 4527 of him being trapped in the Dark Aether, he said this, I have heard more rumours about a creature hunting the Elder God entities who battle for supremacy here. They say it is fairly new, not of the old ones who would be the Elder Gods I just mentioned, Cortifex, Nauticus, etc., who have fought to a stalemate since this realm was young. There is a particularly disturbing detail I keep hearing. They say it actually consumes those who it defeats in combat, devouring them whole. And somehow it absorbs all the Dark Aether power from its victim and adds it to its own. Some claim that it gains new abilities this way, such as the power to change its appearance, allowing it to stalk its prey disguised as someone they trust. The funny thing is, at the time of us reading this, we thought that it was a random stranger, or later on we learned that it was Zikov that was sending these messages to us, but either way we still thought this was just from the perspective of a normal person talking to us, but little did we know these messages were from the Forsaken taking the appearance of Zikov, his normal human form, manipulating us. But the interesting thing is, as he says, the Forsaken got his powers from consuming those it defeats in combat, and then devouring them whole. And because one of his abilities is to change appearance, that means he must have defeated an enemy that had this ability. And who are the only two characters we know in zombies that were shapeshifters? Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man. And because we know Dr. Monty was sent to the Dark Aether, could that mean that the Forsaken consumed Dr. Monty and then gained his shape-shifting ability? Because even though Dr. Monty wasn't an Elder God, well, Elder Gods weren't the only creatures that the Forsaken killed. Yes, they were the main trophies, but he also took on slightly lesser powerful creatures, in which, in my opinion, that is the category that Dr. Monty would fall in. The same could apply to Dr. Monty if he was sent to the Dark Aether in 1960 and also managed to survive in there. Just like Zikov, the longer he survived, the more powerful he would have become as well. And as far as we know, there could have been the small chance that Dr. Monty also became powerful enough to become an Elder God. And he did come up against the Forsaken, and the Forsaken won, consuming him and his shape-shifting power. But it's so interesting to read on through all of these notes, now that we know that these are from the perspective of the Forsaken, kind of being narcissistic, wanting us to think it's from some random survivor speaking about this scary creature that exists in the Dark Aether. He was using Requiem and Omega. He wanted them to believe that they need to do whatever possible to help him escape the Dark Aether because he's the only one that has the knowledge to stop the Forsaken, but they didn't know this was the Forsaken. This was his plan all along, make them think he's vital to stopping the Forsaken when actually this is him. The Forsaken told Requiem all of this stuff to make them believe, or not even that, try and convince them of how powerful he was from the perspective of his human form. And yeah, as you just go through these documents, on day 4729 he goes on to say, "I have learned more about the one who seeks to rule this land alone. I do not know why, after centuries of stalemate, this particular creature is suddenly ascendant. I am convinced that should it defeat its rivals, its bottomless appetite for power will not go away. So I must somehow find a way to stop it before it decides Mother Russia loops like a banquet." On day 4771 he says, "I saw it, the Great Devourer, the Stealer of Souls, or as more of us have started to call it, the Forsaken. I was searching for machine parts further from my fort than I usually dared to travel. This was in territory once ruled by an old one who valued science and technology, so I hoped I could find a trove of good components. Instead, I realised I was being stalked by some nameless horror too big for even my crucible-empowered weapon. Just as it cornered me, it seemed to sense something amiss, started to turn, and then was suddenly in the clutches of the Forsaken. It was different than I anticipated. In fact, it seemed to change appearance as it tore into the flesh of the thing that was haunting me. I ran. I don't think the Forsaken even noticed me, but it was real. I have always wondered who that old one would have been that valued science and technology. I've looked through the backgrounds of all of the Elder Gods, and I couldn't really think who that would have been. But in his final document he says, day 5169. The old ones are encountered less and less these days, as the Forsaken continues its steady rise. The creature has grown into a size only rivaled by the crowds of followers that are drawn to it. I watched them from a distance, through a telescope I restored. What I see has left me shaken." He then just goes on to talk about his army, but there's one final radio from Zikov which I find interesting, but it's Zikov explaining how the Forsaken came to power.
"Things were not always like this, my friend. I remember a time here in the Dark Aether when the Forsaken did not even exist. When I first crossed over, things were very different. And back then, there were many powerful entities at war here, forming alliances, betraying each other. Not that I realized it at first, any more than an insect would know the names of leaders in the Great Patriotic War. But eventually I came to recognize the lords of the Dark Aether. They had been locked in an ever-changing stalemate since the dawn of time. And then, one by one, the Forsaken hunted them down, consumed them, and made their power his own. The Forsaken imposed order upon the Dark Aether. Those who remained rallied to him, seeking his favor and pledging loyalty. This is a different place than when I arrived. It is infinitely more dangerous.
So, back to the ultimate question. Did the Forsaken consume Dr. Monty? And I think there's a very good chance he did. Because the Forsaken gets his powers from enemies that he devours, he has many abilities, one of them being able to shapeshift, just like Dr. Monty could turn into this, an old man. He was also known by many other names over history.
You do realize that he's manipulated you? That's what he does. Dr. Monty is just one of the many names he's been known by. The Great Dragon, the Beast. Is this ringing any bells? Beelzebub, Lucifer, Satan, the devil.
So it's definitely a possibility. Am I saying that's for sure what happened? No, it could have been some different Dark Aether creature, another elder god. Dr. Monty may have died as soon as he was banished to the Dark Aether. He may have died not long after. Either way, because he wouldn't have died of old age, he would have had to have been killed by something. And because even though, yes, he was powerful, he was far from the most powerful thing in existence. So there were many ways he could have died. I definitely don't think he would be alive anymore, because if he was, the Forsaken would know about it, and if he didn't kill him by the time of Cold War, that was either because Monty was already dead, or he was irrelevant to the Forsaken. Maybe his powers had dwindled even further. Who knows? Either way, to me this is super interesting, and hopefully it is to you guys as well. So there we go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, drop a like rating. Make sure you are subscribed to stay up to date with the latest videos on the channel. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye.